In dem Video geht es jetzt ja darum, jede Maske, die James Root, also der Gitarrist von Slipknot, jemals getragen hat, zeigt AJ Good, aka The House of Masks, jetzt auf. Er zeigt jedes Bild, er zeigt jede Maske, dann hau raus, jetzt habe ich voll abgelenkt. Er zeigt jede Maske und so. Das ist richtig interessant. Viele wissen ja hier vielleicht auch, dass ich James auf meinen Unterarm habe. Ja, es ist ein sehr interessantes Video, also Abfahrt.
What the deal is by now. This is the Slipknot Definitive Mask History Series, and today we are doing James Root.
Oh my god, why'd you call him James? His name is Jim Root.
Well, actually, his Instagram says James. What a weird fucking thing for you guys to complain about. Anyways, for those of you that are new here, this is the series where we take a deep dive into the history of all of Slipknot's masks, member by member, and we set out to archive every single one. So first up, we're doing the original core band, that is Sid through Corey. Then we'll be working on some of the new members, and then we will be working on ex-members. So with all of that being said, let's not waste any more time. We're gonna hop right on into the first list, and that is James Root's self-titled masks. Let's go.
Dass AJ und sein Channel noch nicht.
Alright, so
mehr
real quick,
Abonnenten
as
hat.
always, I'm going to give a nice
Echt
big
munter.
thank you to Nico and his website slipknothistory.com, which definitely helps me with a lot of these
So,
photos.
ja.
I am going to be dropping the website's information down below, slipknothistory.com. Make sure to go check them out. There are tons and tons of photo albums over there, not just of the Slipknot masks, but the
Hat
jumpsuits as
meiner
well.
Meinung
There's a
nach
separate
viel
page
mehr
for oddball
verdient.
masks, all that good shit. So make sure to go check them out, and let's get on into Jim Root's self-titled mask list. And we start off with
So
a
geile
very,
Masken mit bei.
very controversial mask, and for some reason, no matter how long this information's been out there, people still refuse to believe that Jim actually wore this hood. Both Jim and Josh have confirmed on separate occasions that Jim did in fact wear this hood.
I ended up wearing a bondage hood that was a size too small for my head, so my sweat was just filling up inside of this thing, and my ears were literally under water, under sweat, and it was, you know, I couldn't move, and it was pushing my jaw back, and it was just extremely uncomfortable.
I've even made a video that was specifically about this topic, and for some reason people still like to argue that Jim never wore the bondage hood. But nonetheless, here we have Jim Root's first mask with the band Slipknot, the bondage hood, and he actually only used this for one live show because it was so uncomfortable and terrible. He was basically drowning inside the mask. He said that his ears were filling up with water and all that crazy shit, so he quickly changed to the Jester mask, which brings us to our first Jester mask, and that is the early Ozfest mask. So when Slipknot took off for Ozfest, we saw Jim sporting this nice, clean variant of his Jester. This is hands down one of the coolest versions for me because a lot of the choices on this mask don't seem to make sense. There are a few stitched areas on the forehead and the cheek that just kinda shouldn't be there, but they are anyways, and I think that it looks really cool. This is definitely your basic Slipknot mask at its core. We've got a zipper mouth, we've got lots of leather bondage style strapping, we've got stitching, and all of this was done on a regular store-bought mask. This mask pretty much epitomizes what a Slipknot mask was back in the day, and I really, really dig it. I think that his Ozfest was one of his coolest, and we got to see it go through various changes, such as the slightly weathered Ozfest Jester. Now you can see that this thing is starting to yellow, it's starting to get a little dirtier, and eventually we're going to start to see it rot like in this photo. Now we're in full-on grunge mode, and here's a fun fact. Jim actually had a giant rot hole in the nose that he started to patch with caulking. So with the members of Slipknot and their crew not really knowing much about masks, they just decided
Also die Arbeit, die AJ sich da immer macht, ne, das ist Wahnsinn. Also das alles rauszusuchen, ist echt krass.
they would fix the rot by cutting the holes out and then refilling them with caulking, giving this a very, very strange look. Definitely one of my favorite Jim masks. I know I said it with the clean version, but I actually think that I dig the rotting version of it even more. We've got a lot of paint missing here. We're starting to rust up. Just everything about this version was cool. Now, last but not least for the Ozfest mask was a version that my buddy Joey Fabricius and I found a few years ago when we were looking to knock out a bunch of different Jesters for my collection. We refer to this version as the the white face paint version.
Apropos seine Collection. Es ist Wahnsinn, Alter. Ihr müsst euch mal die Videos angucken von ihm, das, was er an Masken hat, ne? Das ist Wahnsinn. Das ist echt krass.
And it's because the entire mask was coated with a thick white face paint covering almost every single colored portion of the mask. As you can see, the eyes no longer have red around them, and pretty much the only thing that stayed true to the original paint job was the chin horn. You can also see that the mask is heavily deteriorating. A lot of that caulking has come off, and there is more rot going on around the nose area. And it appears as though Jim has added some tribal markings around the lip, and they go between all of the rivets there, so it gives it almost a Joey look to this mask. Now, we have no clue why, but this mask was actually only worn once in this state, and it was way later into Slipknot's self-titled days. Jim just broke this out for one show, wore it the way that it was, and then we never saw it again. Next up, we've got a new jester conversion for Jim. This is what would eventually become the Dynamo variant. For some reason, whoever converted this for Jim left the neck very open, a lot of different cuts going on. And as tight as this mask was worn by Jim and as much abuse as he put it through, you know that neck isn't going to last very long the way that it is, so eventually we get a patch. This photo doesn't show it so grand, but I'm sure that if you guys are familiar with the Dynamo concert, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. That neck patch was just another piece of latex from another mask, stitched to the different neck cuts and flaps from the previous version to kind of give them a little bit more durability, and to make sure that they wouldn't rip as much as they would without the patch.
The wild women, the ripping and the tearing, the ripping and the tearing.
Here we see the Dynamo mask a little bit further into its life. As you can see, there is some rot starting to form around the nose, and we've also got this really weird tint on the mask from Jim's hair dye. The mask continued to rot this way until the end of its days. Here we see Jim's next jester conversion for the self-titled era, and this is the W neck, and this is actually the pre-W neck. The reason that we call this the pre-W neck is because, as you'll see here shortly, Jim added another patch to this mask, and the neck was actually cut into that of a W shape. So here is the pre-W neck, obviously prior to having that patch, and here is the W neck variant. As you can see, you've got that nice W shape with the patch down below, and this mask did not stay bright white for long due to Jim's hair dye. By the time we see it at the Kerrang 2000s award, the mask is a very blue-purple look, definitely a unique look for Jim's jesters. I absolutely
Geil. Die Haare, die Maske, die Farbe der Maske, ist alles perfekt. Perfekter Look.
Adore this version. Yeah. Easily one of the coolest, most standout of all of Jim's actual
so geil.
Jester conversions. Now, a fun fact about this jester conversion, we're actually going to see this on the Iowa list later, because not only did Jim wear it here for the late self-titled era, but he also sported it a good bit during Iowa. Here we have a unique variation of the W-neck jester. This was after the Kerrang Awards, and you can see that Jim actually has some face paint in his hair, which easily covered the mask over the course of this concert. This was during a Halloween show, and for whatever reason, Jim smeared a bunch of white face paint in his hair. And as he headbanged and sweated through the night, the face paint started to cover not only his mask, but his guitar and his suit as well, giving the entire look a very ghastly, pasty look. Now, as far as we know, the W-neck was the last mask that Jim wore for the self-titled era, which will take us straight into Iowa. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Iowa era for Jim Root's masks, and this is going to be an interesting era, not only because we do see a good amount of variations for the actual jester conversions, but we also see the first masks that were ever sculpted for James. So there are going to be 3 styles of masks that we'll see here, and that is the Forum's Novelties jester conversions, and then 2 separate styles of sculpts that were completed by the artist Screaming Mad George for Jim. I do believe that the Iowa era, along with the self-titled era, are the most interesting for Jim's masks, but we'll go ahead and hop on into this and let you guys decide for yourself. Now, first up, we've got that familiar face, the W neck, which I talked about in the self-titled era. It was actually the last mask that Jim wore for the self-titled era, and as you can see, he continues to wear it here during Iowa. Now, as you can see, it has changed slightly from the last time that we saw it. You can't see so much of the blues and the purples, and you can't see so much of the old face paint residue that was left on there. However, we do have a very strong strange purplish red dye going on the face now. Also a side effect from Jim Root's hair dye. Moving on, we see that Jim has yet again added white face paint to his hair, and that is presumably what has gotten onto the mask here, giving it another pastel, pasty white look. And just for the record, this is probably my all-time favorite photo of Jim. I don't know, just super badass. Fight me. As we continue along with the mask, we have the late Iowa W neck, and the mask has gone back to a purple color, again because Jim was constantly doing different hair dyes with his hair, and it just seemed to dye the mask every single time, giving it a drastically different appearance almost every time we saw it. And last but not least, for the W neck jester, we seem to have what appears to be rot on the nose. As you can see, there are tons of different colors going on the face here, all kinds of dirt and grime, but what we also see is a white nose. Now to me, this nose looks extremely reminiscent of the Ozfest jester. Now I can't tell if that is caulking on the nose, and unfortunately this is the only photo that we have to go off of the mask in this condition, but it wouldn't surprise me if the mask had started to rot and he did a small touch up there with caulking again. As I mentioned earlier, this is the last variation of the W neck, which brings us to the Disaster Pieces jester.